afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to welcome you all to Outlaw Semester Panel entitled I Do or I Don't, a discussion on the marriage amendment in Indiana. Today, we will be hearing from our esteemed panelists and moderator on the topic of HJR 6, the pending state constitutional amendment in Indiana to define marriage between one man and one woman. As you all know, this statewide debate echoes a broader national debate, not only on the issue of same-sex marriage, but on gay rights as a whole. What happens here in Indiana is important not only to Hoosier families and individuals, but to the greater national debate as well. To discuss this issue, we have with us some of the prominent voices in the state marriage debate. It is my honor to introduce to you Megan Robertson, the campaign manager for Freedom Indiana, Melina Kennedy. Already an applause, that's great. Melina Kennedy, the Director of Executive Communications for Cummins Inc. Jacqueline Simmons, the Vice President and General Counsel for Indiana University. And then also our own Professor Sanders. Representing a wide array of interests, we look forward to hearing from different perspectives on the marriage amendment in our state. I would like to point out that we've attempted to try to get a broad array of perspectives on this issue. And as part of the panel, I reached out to several state organizations to try to get someone from the right side or the other side of the debate, but was not successful. Some of the institutions I reached out to were the Family Institute of Indiana. I didn't hear back from them, and the Pence administration also didn't want to comment on the pending political issue that this is. But nonetheless, I hope we will have a very spirited debate today about the marriage amendment and see a lot of perspectives on the issue and really have some good food for thought. Before I turn it over to Professor Sanders, we would like to thank once again our panelists for joining us today, Professor Sanders for helping us out with this, our co-sponsors including ACS, the Family Law Society, and the LGBT Clinical Project, and finally Maurer School of Law for all helping making this panel possible. Thank you guys and enjoy this debate.
Well, as Matt said, efforts were made to try to get a pro-HJR 6 speaker, so I think this is probably more going to be a forum than a debate. But let me set this up with just a little bit of background. A statute in Indiana enacted in 1997 says the following: only a female may marry a male. Only a male may marry a female. A marriage between persons of the same gender is void in Indiana, even if the marriage is lawful in the place where it is solemnized. Now, the language behind the proposed House Joint Resolution 6, HJR 6, says the following: only a marriage between one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in Indiana. A legal status identical or substantially similar to that of marriage for unmarried individuals shall not be valid or recognized. If this language is approved this spring by a simple majority of the General Assembly, it would go to the voters in November, in next November's off-year elections, and if approved there by a simple majority, would be added to Indiana's Constitution. Just one more word by way of background. You may be thinking, well, it's already a statute, this is a constitutional amendment, it's just sort of a way of saying, we really mean it, we really feel strongly about that. But it's important to realize that a constitutional amendment would mean more than that. It would tie the hands of future legislatures to reconsider the issue by meaning that an ordinary statute couldn't be used to legalize same-sex marriage in Indiana if the state is ready for that in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. A state constitutional amendment also disables the state judiciary from ruling on the propriety or the constitutionality, at least under the state constitution, of the statutory ban on same-sex marriage. So it insulates the ban from both legislative and state judicial review. And it's also important, I'm sure this will come out in our discussion, that second passage about a legal status identical or substantially similar to that of marriage, that would prohibit Indiana from having civil unions or statewide domestic partnerships, sort of marriage light, as some other states have done. And importantly, it could also very plausibly endanger the ability of public employers like Indiana University that have adopted domestic partner benefit programs for their employees from even being able to maintain those programs as well. So just with that little bit of table setting, I want to start by asking Megan, so Freedom Indiana, as I understand the message, is emphasizing that this fight is not about legalizing same-sex marriage or not. It is about whether this amendment is unnecessary or whether it could have harmful effects. The message is that Hoosiers should oppose the amendment even if they don't necessarily yet support marriage equality. So explain that messaging a little bit, Megan. What's the difference between supporting marriage equality and opposing HJR 6?
Sure. Well, first I just want to say thanks for having me here. And to answer the question, our campaign is a very broad coalition. There are a lot of reasons to oppose HJR 6. It could be because you support gay marriage. It could be because you think this shouldn't be put in our Constitution. It could be because you think that the language is very vague and calls a lot of questions. You know, I'm not an attorney, and you guys will be soon, but the language of substantially similar, what does that mean, and who decides what that means? It seems to me that it's incredibly vague, and a lot of people don't support it because of that. But you know, our campaign it's a bipartisan coalition. We've got Republicans, we've got Democrats, Libertarians, all sorts of people who oppose it who oppose HJR 6 for different reasons. And our goal is to bring as many people as we can into this coalition for whatever reason that they oppose HJR 6. If you oppose it for any reason, you're with us on this issue, and we want to make sure that all of the arguments are put out there for legislators, because legislators are going to oppose and support HJR 6 for very different reasons as well. So we want to make sure that they're hearing from constituents from all sides of the issue, and that gives us the best opportunity to sway their opinion on it, and also hopefully sway their vote to vote against this.
Okay. And Freedom Indiana is emphasizing that it's a bipartisan coalition, that it has a lot of Republican support as well as Democrat support, faith leaders, community organizations, major corporations like Cummins and Eli Lilly. Megan, you yourself have a fascinating personal and political story, and I think it's worth just getting a little bit out of that on the table to talk about, you know, sort of what this issue means. Before coming to HJR 6, you were a well-respected Republican political organizer. You worked for Congressman Luke Messer here in Indiana, Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard, U.S. Senator Dan Coates, presidential candidate John Campaign. You've organized rallies in Indiana for Sarah Palin. Now you're the leader of the fight against a public policy measure that many of your former conservative compatriots probably support. What brought you to your passion and commitment on this issue?
Well, and I've always held this position that I didn't think that, you know, that this was a legislative thing that should be put in the Constitution. Every time it came up, I rolled my eyes. But now it's kind of reaching a critical point where this actually could happen. It actually could be sent to the voters. And so, you know, I felt like it was an opportunity to show that a lot of Republicans, frankly, aren't supportive of this. Most of my friends in Indianapolis who I've worked with on campaigns think that this isn't something that we should be doing, and many of them support gay marriage. So I think in the past it could have been categorized as a Republican-Democrat issue, but not even then, because as many of you know, there were a lot of Democrat legislators who helped push this issue to this point. I think now public opinion has shifted dramatically, and folks feel a little bit more comfortable saying that they're not in favor of this, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Mayor Greg Ballard has spoken out against this. He's a person that I worked for. A lot of the other guys I work for, don't necessarily agree with me on this issue, and that's okay. But the point is that we need to be bringing more people into the group working against this amendment, and it's not really a partisan issue, I don't think. And honestly, if it is a partisan issue, then we have a real big problem going forward, because the legislature has an awful lot of Republicans, supermajorities in both houses. So we need to have Republicans that are willing to stand up and vote against this, and that's kind of why I thought it was my obligation and responsibility to stand up and say it's okay to be a Republican and be against this. We need to, our party needs to be about bringing more people in, not excluding people, and that's what our state should be about too. So that's kind of how I got involved.
Okay. Great, thank you. Melina, just in case some people, students here in the audience, aren't familiar with Cummins, where you're an executive. Cummins is a Fortune 500 corporation headquartered in Columbus, just about 45 minutes away, which manufactures diesel engines and power generation systems, sales of more than $17 billion, 46,000 employees worldwide. So Cummins is one of the very prominent members of Indiana's corporate and business and educational communities that have taken a very prominent stance against HJR6. Indeed, Cummins has contributed what's reported to be $100,000 to the campaign that Megan is managing. What drives this opposition? What's the business case as far as Cummins is concerned against HJR6?
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is my alma mater, and I was very proud of IU for taking a position, so that's fantastic news. As Steve mentioned, I work for Cummins, and Cummins has been around for almost 100 years, founded in 1919, and diversity has been a core value for Cummins for as long as anyone can go back and read from former CEOs about the importance of diversity and inclusion at Cummins. And in fact, it was interesting when you said 1997 was when the language first passed, because I pulled some history of some of the actions that Cummins has taken to kind of show that they really mean business when it comes to this core value of diversity. And in 1998, we amended our treatment of other policy to include sexual orientation, and then in 2000 became one of the first, if not the first, companies in the state to offer domestic partner benefits. So there is a business case. We feel very strongly at Cummins that it's not only the right thing to do to promote diversity and inclusion, but that there's a real business case for it. Our company only succeeds if we have the most diverse, innovative, new ideas. We need to lead in technologies to win in the markets, and when you have more people with more ideas, more inclusion, you're going to get better ideas and promote more innovation. So Cummins has been very committed, both because it's the right thing to do and it's the history of our company, but frankly, we feel pretty strongly that there is a business case for diversity. And so we've been very strong on this particular issue. And just a quick kind of funny side note, Megan and I have been, not in my Cummins hat, on different sides of the table, and we've worked very well and collaboratively on this issue, and we were having coffee regarding Cummins' participation, and a few folks walked by and took triple takes. Wow, so this is very bipartisan. This is really important to Cummins and really important to the state. And we don't want to have a state that sends an unwelcoming message, and this would do that and cause a lot of damage in our view.
Indeed, Melina, you were a Democratic candidate for governor of Indianapolis. Is that correct?
Mayor.
For mayor of Indianapolis, I'm sorry. Running against the candidate that Megan was
Right.
was
I ran
working
the
for.
campaign against Melina. Everything's fine now, though. It's all good.
Megan, so when Cummins began granting domestic partner benefits about 13 years ago, I remember it was controversial, both in Columbus and in the state. J. Irwin Miller, your company's sort of founding presence, wrote a very eloquent letter to the editor about why this was necessary. But I'm curious, have companies like Cummins and Eli Lilly received pushback on this issue, on their stance, from employees, shareholders, customers? How do you navigate through a diversity of opinion on an issue like HJR6 and legal recognition of same-sex marriage among these sorts of stakeholders?
Well, as you can imagine, as a company of 46,000 employees, we definitely have a lot of different opinions on this particular issue, and we do receive, comments not in support of the company's official position. And so we always respect everyone's opinion, but it's very clear and tied back to this is a core value, and we find this to be against our core value of diversity and inclusion. And just kind of respectfully listen, but respond. That's where our company's position is. I've personally received some emails, regarding some of the communications I've been involved in. We've been very vocal. I mean, clearly we've stepped up as a company financially, but also signed on to an amicus brief for the Supreme Court decision. Our CEO has authored many letters to the editor. In Minnesota, where one of our business units is headquartered, our power generation business, they had a similar initiative on the ballot, and the president of that business unit also got actively involved and testified publicly, and we received a lot of pushback, but we always come back to politely, responding. We understand. Thank you for sharing your opinion. But at Cummins, we support diversity. I wasn't there at the time, but I do know that when the domestic partner benefits were introduced in 2000, and that's before there was an Indianapolis presence, and so all of the Indiana work was in Columbus. There was a lot of very hard, pushback. People showed up to board meetings, and the CEO at the time, Tim Solso, who's just fantastic in every way and very committed to diversity, had to answer a lot of questions and hear a lot of pushback and feedback from people who were not on the same page, but always came back to, we'll listen. You're welcome to share your opinion, but at the end of the day, diversity is that important at Cummins, and that's where our position is.
Okay. Great. Jackie, you're the chief attorney for Indiana University, the 8-campus system, the chief legal advisor to the president, the board of trustees. IU made a lot of news last week by publicly embracing, essentially signing on to membership in the Freedom Indiana Coalition. I know from my personal work on this issue, IU has long opposed previous versions of the marriage amendment. IU has worked against attempts in the General Assembly to prevent it from offering domestic partner benefits, but it's always done this kind of quietly, behind the scenes, figuring that was the way for the university to be most effective and prevent, potential threats to its other interests. Something must have changed. What flipped in the political calculus? What changed that prompted the university to decide on this issue at this moment to make its position undeniably public with a picture of the president of the university and a very strong statement in support of Freedom Indiana?
I actually asked that question because it seemed important to me to understand why now. Why are we doing it now? And there are really two sort of pieces to the answer. One is with the formation of Freedom Indiana, we now have a truly bipartisan, we can be much more vocal about it and not just be seen as those crazy liberals in Bloomington, Indiana are doing it again, right? And so being taken much more seriously when you join forces with the likes of Cummins and Lilly and with others across the state. So we felt now was a time when our voice would really be heard. The second one, frankly, is timing. I do find it interesting and really troubling that Indiana would now be considering this constitutional amendment at the same time every other state in the country who is putting this issue forward to voters is going in the direction of recognizing the rights of same-sex couples to be married. And so to me it was like, no, the whole country's moving on and we're going to go backwards. If you think about when the statute was passed in 1997, that was 16 years ago. There's almost an entire generation of people who have come through since that point in time, and I find that more young people are much more welcoming and opening. I want people outside of Indiana to think of us as, those nice Midwestern people who are friendly and help you, and you drop something and they say, oh, ma'am, you dropped your wallet. So why would we now say, no, now's the time to pass this constitutional amendment? So I think it's a combination of recognizing that the opinions across the country are changing and that it would really be disastrous to Indiana to have the state now have this constitutional amendment.
And just in case you're keeping score, the number of states currently recognizing same-sex marriage is up to 14. That's from 0 10 years ago, and I think it's something like doubled in the last year. There are 35 states that still ban same-sex marriage. 31 of those are by constitutional amendment, so Indiana remains actually one of the few states that has a public policy against same-sex marriage, but hasn't put it in its state constitution. And up until the 2012 election, it was always the conventional wisdom among political scientists and activists that you might be able to persuade your legislators, you might be able to persuade an appellate court, but direct democracy, taking the issue to the voters, was the sure kiss of death for gay rights, that the pro-equality side could always be out-organized. And actually that changed in 2012 when I believe it's Washington and Maryland and Minnesota all had the issue of same-sex marriage in one way or the other before their voters, whether to legalize it or whether to pass an amendment, and the pro-equality side prevailed in all three of those states. So something seems to have shifted in the politics nationally on this issue that would indicate that Indiana's kind of going in the direction opposite the rest of the country. But Jackie, I want to I was especially happy that you're on this panel. Many IU faculty and staff and students, many of whom are in this room, are concerned that HJR 6 prohibition of, quote, a legal status identical or substantially similar to that of marriage for unmarried individuals would endanger IU's ability to continuing offer domestic partner benefits, which our Board of Trustees approved in 2001 for employees and for students who are in same-sex relationships. You can get that insurance for your domestic partner. But the proof you have to show is often kind of similar to the proof you have to show to get a marriage license. So has the university done a legal analysis on this question? Is that a valid concern that IU's ability to offer domestic partner benefits will be attacked if this amendment passes? And if so, what is IU doing to prepare for the possibility that its benefits program might be challenged?
Yeah, we had already engaged outside counsel to give us an opinion on this because for those of you who are in law school, you may not know this, but the best job in the world is to be in-house counsel, and the worst job in the world in terms of people really respecting your opinion is to be in-house counsel, because they always think that the outside lawyers are smarter than the inside lawyers. So whenever it's a controversial issue, they always say to me, well, could you get outside counsel opinion on that? And in some cases, I'm hiring outside counsel who were associates who worked for me just, a few years ago. So it's kind of odd. But we did send it to outside counsel, and we are expecting a legal opinion on it this week. I suspect, having looked at the issue myself, that their answer is going to be, well, it's so vague, the language is so vaguely worded that it is possible that a court would find that you would not be able to provide these domestic partner benefits. But we're also having outside counsel look at the specific language in our benefits program so that they could advise us if there is anything that could be amended or changed that might improve the chances of our benefits program surviving, if you will, some court challenge, because IU is extremely committed to continuing to be able to provide those domestic partner benefits. We think it's absolutely essential. If you're trying to recruit a great chemist from another university, or if you're trying to recruit a great constitutional law scholar from another university or another law school, it's really important to them, whether or not it affects them personally, or whether it's just that they want to feel like they're going to be part of the university community that respects diversity and will treat people fairly. So it is something we're extremely committed to.
Okay, and we want to open the forum to questions from you all too. I'd like to ask maybe one more round of questions to our panelists, and then see if you have questions. But Jackie, you sort of led me into something I was going to ask you and Melina to comment on, and that is, do you have it's one thing to say this is consistent with our values and the message we want to send. Is there empirical evidence? Do you have anecdotal evidence of people who have left IU or Cummins or other major employers who have threatened to leave, or an opportunity to get someone here that's been lost, or that you think would have been lost if we didn't have domestic partner benefits, or that will be lost by the message? I remember when IU was considering domestic partner benefits in 2001, one of the biggest supporters was Dan Dalton, who was then the dean of the business school, and Dan was kind of a big, gruff guy, not exactly kind of the warm and fuzzy type, but he was just passionately committed to this issue because he said he knew of people that Kelly was losing or in danger of losing because IU didn't offer domestic partner benefits. So is there actual evidence of that, that this is not just a matter of institutional and corporate values, but a realistic recruitment and retention issue? both of you.
Absolutely. I can tell you those search committees that I've been involved in for, deanships or high-level executive positions within Indiana University, in almost a quarter of those interviews, that is one of the questions that people will raise to me. Some of them have done their research and they see that we already offer the benefits. Others will say, how committed are you to continuing to provide those? So yes, I can tell you firsthand, I know that we have candidates who would not come here if we did not offer those benefits.
And same thing with Cummins. We have an affinity group that has really been trying to reach out and hear from other Cummins employees about their feelings about this particular development. And we're talking to some people in particular about whether or not they'd be comfortable testifying. It's a little bit sensitive because they hold current jobs, but people who are very concerned and don't want to stay in this state if this passes. I can also say, wearing a different hat, years ago when I worked in economic development for the city of Indianapolis, talking to one business that was considering moving to Indianapolis that was coming from California. And at the time, I think it was Cincinnati or a city in Ohio that had a local measure, and this particular person was really concerned that Indianapolis might do something locally, and at the time we didn't, but that was an important question for her.
And Melina, Cummins is a global corporation. I mean, you have, I don't know how many states you have operations in, but I would think this must get to be a headache, too, that you may have a couple in Minnesota who are legally married, who could get legally married, and Cummins tells them, the company needs you in Indianapolis or in Columbus. And I would imagine those employees might say, if we come there, the law says our marriage has actually vanished. Our marriage is void. So is this also a headache for corporations, just as an even more practical concern of being able to deploy people where you need them around the country?
Yeah, absolutely, and especially considering we do have a presence in a number of states within the U.S., and of course we're global as well in other countries, but our headquarters is in Indiana. We have 8,000 employees here, and we have very key positions here that we want to be able to recruit the best in the world without those kinds of limitations. And to Jackie's point, another key business case for being against this amendment is the freeze that it puts on being able to recruit really good people who don't want to come to a state that has something like this in place.
Megan, I want to ask you to, divulge what may or may not be sort of internal secrets of Freedom Indiana, and that is, so realistically, this amendment could be stopped at two different stages in the legislature, and it could be stopped either by getting a majority of legislators to vote against it, or by keeping it bottled up in committee, or finding so that it doesn't come onto the floor actually, just through some procedural mechanism. If it passes the General Assembly, then the fight becomes preventing it from getting a majority in the November 2014 elections. I know Freedom Indiana is focused on both of those choke points. How do you assess your chances for one or the other?
Well, I would say right now I feel I'm a campaign manager, so I don't plan for when things go right. I plan for when they go wrong. And so, but I would say I'm cautiously optimistic, which if you guys knew me, you'd know that that's a really big deal, that I'm cautiously optimistic, that we can stop this in the legislature. My sense is within the Republican caucus, both in the House and the Senate, people do not want to deal with this issue. They would much rather avoid it, and the fact that they want to avoid it is important. Obviously, we have a lot of support in the Democratic caucuses. So, right now, the big push is making sure that legislators are hearing from folks in their districts that they do not want this sent to the ballot, that they are against this amendment, and if they vote against the amendment, that they will support them in the upcoming elections, because it's all about the campaigns coming into the primary elections and the general. So. Trying to reassure those folks. If this ends up going to the ballot, we are prepared. Cummins and Lilly and all of our great partners have said that they are prepared to fight it at the ballot box, and believe we have good chances there. But the real thing is that we want to avoid this ever getting there, because it's such a negative conversation. It will reflect incredibly poorly on our state as a whole that we're even considering this, but also. You have to think about the lives that this impacts. In some towns in Indiana, it can be hard enough being 15 years old and being gay, and dealing with all of that, let alone having the entire state vote on whether they think you should have rights as the same rights as everybody else in the state. It's just incredibly negative, and so we're trying to avoid that, and I think we can avoid that. But that's why we need people in places like IU being active, going to our phone banks, helping. We've got signups outside if you're not already volunteering. But also, I just want to throw in, since we're talking about IU, I want to thank everybody for your leadership, because it's not just because the president of your university decided to do this. He didn't do that in a vacuum. He did that because he knows where the students and the faculty and the staff stand on this issue. And because of that, some of you might not have heard, but today Wabash and DePauw both came out against HJR 6, which is... I don't think anybody's going to talk about the liberals up at Wabash College. Not an issue there, but they are taking from the leadership that happened here. So it's a really exciting day for us, and we've got a lot more of exciting days coming that is going to help us as we're talking to legislators about why they shouldn't pass this.
Purdue, by contrast, has taken the position that Purdue doesn't comment on social issues. So.
Steve, it was interesting.
Jackie,
Did you see the survey in the Indianapolis Star where 2/3 of people thought that Indiana University should not take a position on a political issue? And I was so disappointed in that kind of result. How would they think? I mean, I thought universities were supposed to be thought leaders. I thought we were supposed to be the area where people are challenged on their thinking. So I was really disappointed.
Well, and maybe when you depends when you define it as a social issue, it's sort of should the university take a position on spanking your children or abortion or something like that. But one of the things that you and Melina have really drawn out is and I remember, because I was involved in the domestic partner benefits effort in 2001. For the trustees, this was a recruiting and retention issue. This wasn't deciding to randomly comment on whether we should pull out of Afghanistan or not. This was something that directly affects the university. And so a university that is concerned about playing a role in the state's economic development has a stake in this question. It's not just sort of imparting its wisdom to anybody who wants to listen. So I'm curious if you all have questions for our panelists. Now's the time. Yeah, Matt.
I wanted to ask Ms. Robertson. So you've been reaching out to a bipartisan Republican groups all across the state. I was wanting to know your success rate with religious groups inside the state. If you've been able to get any traction with religious groups in India.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are plenty of religious institutions that are against the amendment, and I was literally just this weekend. I get if you email the info@freedomindiana.org, they go to me. They go to other people too, but I read them. And we actually had a Mennonite church in South Bend that had drafted some talking points and wanted to talk to us about it. And so we do have a lot of faith institutions that are getting involved. We also, we have one staffer. We're actually adding another one that their entire focus is working with faith-based organizations and involving them in the conversation. So, obviously the other side of this is organizing heavily in some of those places, and we kind of knew that was going to happen, but we've got folks on our side too.
Do you have some faith-based organizations that are supportive of the idea of same-sex marriage?
Sure, yeah, there are religious institutions all over the state that are supportive of.
Sorry.
There finally went. But there are religious institutions all over the state that are supportive of same-sex marriage. And generally, the message that I've gotten from those groups is, it's about treating people with the golden rule, treating people the way that you want to be treated, and respecting a committed relationship between other people. That's generally the message that I've heard.
But there are certainly congregations in Bloomington, the Unitarians. I'm sure there are other Quaker
absolutely.
churches, I think, that will perform commitment ceremonies for same-sex couples and probably would do marriage if that were allowed. And the Episcopal Church has had some very vigorous debates on this and so forth. So, Seth.
Melina, Steve alluded before to your experience as a candidate yourself, and I know beyond that, you've also had experience in a leadership role in campaigns at the city, county, and statewide and national level. Just wondered, and I guess this is for Megan too, how you compare the dynamics of an issue campaign like this with a sort of traditional political campaign.
Well, I'll start and turn it over to Megan. I think one thing that became clear to me as through Cummins I became more involved specifically in what's happening today with Freedom Indiana is that right now it really is a targeted legislative initiative to basically end this year rather than a ballot, rather than kind of mobilizing people on a ballot, which are two very different things. And I'm not as familiar with kind of the lobbying process, so what I had to learn quickly is that the next few months through this legislature are really going to be focused on targeting legislators directly. So, if we were to leave you with a call to action, which we probably should do, it would be if you could spend your time, what would you do? It's calling your legislator. And so stopping it now. And that's much different than, let's say, a big campaign that's centered around an election, if we get to that, and we hope we don't. And then you're talking about more public opinion and bringing people in, generally speaking. So those are different things, and that was of interest to me as I got involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much voter registration right now. It's that you're focused on activating people to talk to their legislators, which is different. I would say there's two other things that I've found to be very different. First off, we don't have a candidate. So that means that I end up going to lots of things like this, where normally I'd be back in the back messing with my phone, pacing, and I'm sitting up here. So that's definitely different for me. But the other thing I think is the level of enthusiasm regarding this issue. There are so many people who are opposed to HJR 6, and there's a lot of excitement. I've worked on campaigns for the last 10 years. I would say I have not seen anything that compares to the level of enthusiasm that you have regarding this issue, surrounding this issue. And I would liken it to kind of the Obama 08 kind of level of excitement, which I was, obviously, that you already said, I was working on the other side of it, but trust me, I felt it. I noticed everybody was really excited about this guy named Obama. So anyway, point being, there's a lot of excitement, and that's what makes this so fun to work on.
Begin with that.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that comment, you mentioned that it'd be hurtful or harmful to the state to have it on the ballot. And one of the reasons why they do this in off-season elections is to get up the base to come out for an election they wouldn't normally come out for. It could have the opposite effect and blow up in their face in that regard, as you mentioned. And it would also force the state to have a lot of really useful and valuable conversations and shine the spotlight on what actually is a very important issue to a lot of people that people don't understand. So, could it be a positive thing to be on the ballot?
Well, I mean, I still tend to think that the negative side of it outweighs. This is just an issue where it's going to be an incredibly negative, hurtful campaign from the other side. I think we all can imagine the kinds of ads that we're going to see running, and I just don't think it's worth putting young people who are already struggling through that kind of a debate. But at the same time, it could certainly blow up in folks' faces that are pushing this issue. In Minnesota, they had a similar issue where an amendment got pushed through the legislature, they took it to the voters, and once voters heard from both sides, it turned out that not only did they not support the amendment, but they also were in favor of gay marriage, and now marriage is legal in Minnesota. So, it's a different state, and it's a different, just kind of looking at the constituencies, it's a little bit different. But I think the bottom line is it's better for Indiana if we do not have this come up on the ballot.
Mike.
Foremost, Megan, thank you very much, Freedom Indiana. We all are profoundly grateful. And now my question, I'm trying to understand just how large this is. Do you have a budget? And if so, is that public information? I assume it's bifurcated to the legislative process, and then if we go to the referendum. Can you share that so we have an understanding of?
I won't give a budget number just because I don't know who is in this audience. So I wouldn't want the opposition to know exactly how much we're spending. But what I would say is it is a huge effort. By the end of next week, I would say we will have 30 field staffers on the ground working on this issue across the state.
Some or all of those field staffers are actually paid, right? We're not just talking
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
volunteer door knockers.
No. This is paid staffers who their job is to, activate people, whether it's at the district level to talk to their legislators and schedule one-on-one meetings, or if it's running phone banks that are helping connect folks, find out who is with us on the issue and helping connect them with legislators. But outside of that, we also have a lobbying effort that includes a lot of the major law firms in Indianapolis who do these things. We've got, and this is public, so everybody will know about it anyway, but we've got Barnes and Thornburg, Faegre, Baker and Daniels, Bose, and a couple other groups that are involved in this. So, point being, it's a very broad effort. It's all over the state, and it takes a lot of money to do it. That's for sure.
Melina and Jackie, can I ask you just to follow up on that? To the best of your knowledge, what will Cummins and IU be doing sort of now specifically going forward? Cummins has made a financial investment. Obviously, both organizations have made prominent public statements against it. As a practical matter, when it comes to lobbying legislators, using the president of the university's capital on this question, in other words, what specifically do you imagine your organizations doing kind of on the ground between now and the time the legislature votes on this, or if it goes to a vote next November?
Well, we're doing a number of things. We have our legislative team working closely with Megan and her team on legislative strategy, and we're going to be prepared to provide what kind of testimony or other things are necessary. I mentioned that we have a LGBT and Friends affinity group. They're getting engaged and will be making calls as well with some direction from Freedom Indiana. We're also just getting efforts, even though Cummins has already contributed significantly. For example, I'm part of a group of people at Cummins and elsewhere hosting a fundraiser. So we're trying to raise money for Freedom Indiana so that they can have a very robust field effort. So those are some of the things we're doing, and we'll see. We, again, as Megan explained well, we would much prefer that this end this year and not go to a referendum. But if we get to a referendum, then strategies will change.
Okay. And Jackie, just to be clear, Indiana University has not actually given money to Freedom Indiana, I believe is the case, but is supporting in other ways. What do you imagine, what kinds of steps do you see the university's leadership taking here?
We have a government relations staff in Indianapolis that includes a former legislator who is pretty well known and is actually making some face-to-face visits on behalf of our position on this issue to some of the key legislators. So we are boots on the ground, actively working the issue.
Okay. Mike Flory, I saw you had a question.
I was curious if you've given any strategic thought to getting the legislature to tweak the language to kick the issue down the road, say another year, and see if there's action at the federal level on this. And how do you weigh the pros and cons of it?
Just to clarify Mike's question, the rules for the constitutional amendments in Indiana are such that if the legislature passed some language that was different by one word or one comma from, this language has already passed the General Assembly 2 years ago, I believe. An amendment must pass in 2 successive sessions to separately elected legislatures and then go to the voters. It's already passed once. Now, if it passes again, but the language is different this time, then that resets the clock and it starts over. So that is presumably part of the strategy. Take a comma out, and it's not the same thing, and it can't go to the voters in November. But you were asking, is there thought to, realistically changing the substance?
Here, I'd love to say vote it down and develop on it. And if not that, if your choices are getting the legislature to say, no, we don't want to take this forward, and just trying to put it into it that way, or saying, well, we want to take it forward, but we want to make some changes in it. Take out vague language.
Substantially similar, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several paths to victory, and our first priority would be to just have it not come up, or to just have a straight up and down vote and defeat it. But there's nobody likes to see how these things work out in the legislature, and there are a lot of ways that you can certainly keep it from going forward as a ballot initiative, which is our number one goal, is to keep it from going forward to a referendum. So we're looking at all the options.
Charlotte Sitlow.
What I would call the most recent thing like this was the Rights Amendment in the 70s. I think that was the last issue that this kind of magnitude. And in that year, in that time, there was substantial opposition to the ERA, and yet miraculously, Indiana was the last state to ratify the Rights Amendment. So that there's hope, and I feel that your organization now would do so much better and so much more balance in favor of your actions that that gives me great hope. Have you looked at that at all? That was a very tough fight. I'm the only one that remembers.
It is. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was going to. Well, just this sort of piggybacks on something Charlotte said. It is worth noting that on many issues related to same-sex families and their children, Indiana's law is actually quite good. In 2006, the Court of Appeals said that joint adoptions by same-sex couples were legal in Indiana. Second-parent adoptions by gay and lesbian couples are legal in Indiana. There was a decision last week from the Indiana Court of Appeals on visitation rights by a same-sex partner. Governor O'Bannon, back in the late 90s, signed an executive order, which I think is still in place, banning discrimination for executive branch employees on the basis of sexual orientation. So in many ways, Indiana law is not disastrous when it comes to the rights of same-sex couples and their families. And as I said, the state is one of the few that actually hasn't yet done an amendment. So do you want to follow up at all?
No.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah, in the corner there.
Yeah, you say that this is a bipartisan issue. We see that there are business interests and there are Republican interests that are against this resolution. So I guess my question is, what is the makeup of the people who are trying to press this forward, as far as what does that power-based group look like? And kind of concurrent with that is, geographically speaking, is the entirety of the push for this coming from within Indiana, or how much of this is being incentivized by outside actors?
Well, I would say currently it's folks that are pushing for the amendment. It's mainly in-state right now. I think we may see a change in that. I think when you're looking nationally at what's happening right now, New Jersey is good on gay marriage at this point. You've got Hawaii that was in play that I don't know if it's happened yet, but it's going to happen soon, is my understanding. And then we have Illinois right next door, where there's a push for gay marriage, and I believe that will probably be successful. So when you look at how all this is playing out, the playing field is getting a little bit more narrow. So I would expect that there's a potential that we will see some national organizations getting involved, working for the amendment. I would say that, it is fair to characterize it as the folks that are pushing for this are within the Republican Party. I would not say that they are representative of the entire Republican Party, but there are a couple of people. It's usually religious-based social conservatives who are pushing this issue forward. The rest of the caucus would much rather not deal with it and not have it come up. So that, I guess, that's kind of a brief answer to the question.
Megan, I want to follow up on that and ask you, from what you have seen in Indiana, is there any serious, substantial secular opposition to same-sex marriage? In other words, my perception is it is all, in one way or another, religiously motivated. It's motivated by religious groups. They have the right to participate in the public square, and this is their view, and they're advancing it. But that's my sense of something that's changed in the last 10 or 20 years, that sort of what are sometimes called country club Republicans, secular Republicans, who were once uncomfortable with the idea of same-sex marriage, that's no longer, there's no longer a substantial component there. Is that your sense as well?
That's my sense of it. I was prepared to get a lot of negative feedback from people. When you're going to make a decision like this, you have to weigh all the options and say, okay, if it's the worst thing if it's the worst case scenario, I can't get another job in Republican politics, do I still want to do this? I decided I did want to do it, but I didn't get the negative response I was anticipating. In fact, I think I've only gotten maybe 2 negative comments, and they were from people I didn't know, thus I don't really care that much about. So I've seen a lot of support within the Republican Party, and I think you guys will start to see more of that becoming public.
Jackie or Melina, any last thoughts?
It's great to be here. Thank you for organizing.
Okay, and Jackie and Melina are both alumni of this law school, in case that wasn't.
Let's thank our panelists one more time. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I know there's a lot of law students here, but I know there's a lot of people from the Bloomington community as well as the undergrad, so thank you guys for coming out and participating in this. We greatly appreciate it. If any of you are riled up by this debate now, please see Freedom Indiana's table outside. You can get involved and contact your legislator. And thank you guys once again for coming. Have a good day.